That's okay. Brian Grimm?
Yes, I'm being recorded, I guess. Yes, I'm here.
Okay. David Abel?
I'm here.
And Paul Falls?
I'm here.
And Lisa Whalen, I'm here too. So, all right. So we're all here that are supposed to be here right now. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is our regular City Council work session meeting for April 20th. And we have 3 items on our agenda. We have the Boulevard and right-of-way tree policy discussion, our storm and tree debris policy discussion, and a work session potential calendar. So we're going to start with the Boulevard and right-of-way tree policy. Mr. Baroni, Mike Baroni, do you want to take that?
I'm just going to kick it over to David. He's going to talk about the Boulevard and the right-of-way tree policy. I can certainly chime in if needed, but I'm just going to let David take this one.
Sure. Thanks, Mike and Mayor. Maybe I'll go back a little bit. Sounds like there are some questions today in general about boulevard trees and how that all works. So I'll just maybe a refresher for some, but just go back a little bit. When new subdivisions come into the city, we as the city ask the developer to include boulevard trees or shade trees as they're called in the city ordinance. Generally, they're placed one every 40 feet within the city right-of-way. They're anywhere from 5 feet to 10 feet back from the edge of the road. It all depends upon the development and the front yard setbacks, but generally speaking, that's where the trees are planted when new subdivisions come in. Just for kind of generally speaking, right-of-ways are typically 60 feet wide in total, and you'll have a public road within that right-of-way, which is generally 25 to 30 feet in width. And so within that 60-foot right-of-way, that is where these trees are planted. Just like with any public improvements, once the developer plants these trees and builds all the public infrastructure, the city will accept those public improvements and therefore, take on the maintenance that goes with that in the future. Historically, what we've done specifically with boulevard trees is we'll trim them back from a public safety standpoint, so Gary's trucks don't hit them. They'll trim them back for public safety for views around corners, signage, streetlights, those types of things. And if a tree were to die, we would remove the tree from the right-of-way. And historically speaking, we haven't, as a city, paid to put a new tree back in its place. That's generally been up to whether there's a homeowners association that's active and does that, or the actual property owner themselves would replant that tree. So like I said, historically, we haven't actually put the tree back. I know this topic came up within the last year or so, and it seemed like there was some consensus amongst the council that they wanted us to replace those trees and use the tree replacement environmental enhancement fund. To date, there have not been any dead trees that I'm aware of that have come to our attention that we have replaced. But again, that's a little bit of historical context for you in regards to what we've done with boulevard trees in the past. I believe the last time the council brought this up, it was specific about boulevard trees. You can see as part of your packet, we did do a survey of some neighboring cities to see what they do with their replacement trees. And you can see there's a wide range of different options there. On the third page of your work session packet, I think there's eight or so cities that we called and reached out to see what they had done. And we provided that information. We've also provided the actual section 5107, which is the tree replacement language from our city code there for you as well. So again, just from a discussion standpoint, the council had requested this be on a future work session. And so we didn't want to do too much work until we heard generally what the council was thinking, what direction they wanted to go with this, so we could put our time to good use to research whatever type of ways you want to go regarding this subject. So with that, I'll leave it for discussion.
Okay. Thank you, David. Anybody, I'll start with Pam. Do you want to weigh in? Comments?
I just have a question that we talked about diseased trees may be an upcoming issue again. Do we replace any diseased trees? Has that been normal if it's on a boulevard?
We have not to date. No, it doesn't matter how it would perish, but we have not done that.
Okay.
Okay. Mike, any comments or questions?
Yeah. I think a couple of things. I think the point David made about how the developer turns the public improvements over to the city when the development is done is a good point to make, because the trees are turned over in addition to the streets and all the other infrastructure. And obviously, if something goes bad with the street, we fix the street. It would seem to me that we would probably take the same approach to trees. And part of what the developer provided, they're accepted as public improvements. And it would seem to make sense that we would replace those if they were given to us as part of that development. I think, there's some what I would consider common sense things in here, like I think Chanhassen here says, no, if it's a safety hazard, not replaced. Yeah, I would agree. If it's a safety hazard, we wouldn't do that. And, if there might be some exceptions for specific areas that, we wouldn't be able to write that into code, but, there could be some discretion, but I think it would make sense. And then also, given that the tree fund is set up to replace trees, it just kind of seems to make sense that we would go down that path. But that's my thoughts.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. John, you want to weigh in?
Yes. David, could you clarify for me the right-of-way again? You said 60-foot right-of-way. Let's say the road is 30. Are we saying we have 15 on both sides? Is that how it would work?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, and typically then on that 15, if it was a 30-foot wide road, typically the trees would be 5 to 10 foot back. So we still got a 5-foot, theoretically a 5-foot buffer there between our right of way and the private property. Is that correct?
The trees, yes, the tree is usually 5 to 10 feet back from the edge of the road.
Okay. I drove through a couple Woodland Cove and also Hunters this weekend, and just I know I've seen them before, but unless it's a topic, you probably don't remember everything you see. It looked to me like the trees tended to be fairly close to the curb, and I guess I mentioned to Mike and talking to Mike this morning, I was concerned that as those trees grow and their roots expand, have we ever had issues with the curb and or the sidewalks that run? Or are the trees that are in our list of acceptable trees such that we don't have a root issue with them?
That would be a question for Gary, I think. Have we had any issues with sidewalks or curbing regarding trees?
We have not yet, but we will in the future as they get bigger. I mean, it's inevitable. The trees that we have there, with the maples and the ash trees, I mean, they're all kind of shallow root. They'll be expanding out. Like when you see them in your yard, they'll end up towards the surface, and they will start pushing curbs and sidewalks. I mean, but that'll be further down the road. I mean, if you look at older towns, Chaska and that type of stuff, they have that issue everywhere. We will eventually have that here too.
Okay. And Gary, how do they address that then? What do they do?
Well, as long as I lived in Chaska when I was there, I mean, they didn't do anything with it. They just let them go. I mean, the sidewalk pumped up, and some of the times they would move the sidewalk out and redo it a little bit or go around it. But for the most part, in the old part of town, they just pretty much left it. So, but that, I haven't lived for 15 years, but that's what it was when I was there.
Okay. John, did you have any other questions or comments?
One more, and maybe this is a legal question that I have to take somewhere else, but whoever, David, if you can answer, the attachment gave us the out of the code 510.07 sub 10. I didn't understand the verbiage in number 1, just needed clarification. It says, in cases in which it can be demonstrated that a property cannot accommodate additional trees on site and replacement trees are required, and I don't know why they'd be required, I guess is one question. The city council at its sole discretion may also allow an applicant to contribute $100 per caliper inch to the city's tree replacement. What does that whole paragraph mean?
Sure. So why they would be required to replace trees is they're taking down what's over and above our allowed city ordinance. So they're removing more trees on site than is allowed per code. You can do that if you replace them. And what this is saying is, my site's not big enough. I can't plant that many trees back on my site. So the option is then to pay the city $100 per caliper inch to this fund. So that's our way of gaining money to plant trees somewhere else in the city, because they cannot physically plant them on that development, because usually it's because of size. It's not big enough to allow them to do that.
That makes sense. I had my right-of-way hat on, and I couldn't get past what's this got to do with trees along the boulevard. You know, we're demonstrating that they can't have additional trees. Well, I couldn't fit those two together. I guess the subnote to that is, the $100 still a acceptable fee? How old is this?
It's fairly new. Actually, that number has gone up and down. It's gone both ways. Historically, I think at one time it was $200 per caliper inch, and it was that you know, it's kind of a balancing act based on how much you see coming in and those sorts of things. It's up to the city council to decide what that dollar amount is, because as you can imagine, this would either prevent someone from developing a site or not. It could be a factor, you know, to look at.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And Shannon, any comments or questions?
Yes, thank you. First, just one clarification, David, are boulevard trees and right-of-way trees virtually that's the same thing?
Correct. It's just depending upon who, you know, what people are used to. Some people call them boulevard trees. Some people call them right-of-way trees. It's the same thing. Yes.
Okay. So I've got 3 comments to make. The first one is, I've noticed that some cities discourage planting in rights of way. Medina, Plymouth. I didn't read through all the list, but I know some cities discourage planting in the right of way, and I'm assuming that's because they don't want the liability of taking care of those trees in the future. One of the things I noticed in Plymouth, they say the funding will dry up when the city is fully developed, and I want to make sure that whatever Minnetrista decides to do takes that into account, because it's important to make sure that we don't create a liability for the city indefinitely, because once we're fully developed, that funding for trees is going to dry up. So, and trees are going to continue to die and need to be replaced, and we need to make sure that whatever we decide doesn't create a liability that's going to go on forever. And I just want to make sure that's resonating with other council members. The other thing I wanted to note is that I don't have a problem with replacing diseased trees, but I think a lot of trees that are planted in the rights of way, and I'm not, and maybe we should be discouraging people from planting in the rights of way, or developers planting in the rights of way. But if trees are diseased, I don't have a problem replacing diseased trees in the rights of way. But if they die because of neglect, I think there's a certain responsibility of the property owner to take care of those trees. So I don't think we ought to be replacing trees for just any reason. So I think that's all I wanted to say.
Okay. All right, so I'll weigh in here. I think what Mike Molitor was saying was a good point. We accept roads, we accept infrastructure. These are trees that are, if you will, part of the development given to the city. And I think it is our responsibility to maintain them. We go out and we trim them. And I think if they die, for whatever reasons they may die, most of the time it's disease, we should then replace them. The reason we have this ordinance and the reason we require developers to plant trees in the right of way is so that we have trees along our roads and along our streets, because they beautify our city and they provide an environmental enhancement to our city. And so I think it would behoove us to continue that, and whether we have them planted in front of the sidewalk or maybe directly behind the sidewalk, that can be determined. There's a lot of areas in the city that don't have sidewalks, so this isn't going to be an issue. But I do think it's a good thing to have trees along our roads in our developments. It really does improve and enhance our developments. And that's what we were trying to do with this ordinance. So I'm in favor of replacing the trees, and I'm in favor of maintaining them and caring for them. As far as being a liability to the city, all of our infrastructure is a liability to our city. We have to consider that. And the other issue is, we have an enhancement fund right now, and once that runs out, should it run out, then we can reevaluate whether or not we continue to replace them. But right now, our city isn't going to be fully developed for many, 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 many years, I hope. And that's probably beyond our lifetime. So having said that, are there any other comments?
I'll just add something, Madam Mayor, quick, just for point of clarification. So how it works with the developer, they'll go and plant that tree, and when the city, when they've done with all of their improvements, their public improvements, and we have our inspectors go out there and inspect all of the public improvements, trees are also one of those items. And so when the city accepts all these public improvements, they have to provide it's usually a 1 or a 2 year warranty on these trees as well. So we take every step that we can to ensure that the tree is established and healthy, doesn't need that care that it needs when it's freshly planted. So we do everything we can to ensure that the tree is alive and it's established and it's going to be it's going to thrive, if you will. And if it isn't, we make the developer replace them before we'll accept them. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, Ms. David, I agree. I think this is, they have a 2 year warranty on them. And so we know, and typically when you plant a tree, if it has thrived for 2 years, there's an indication that it's gonna, that it's taken root and that it will survive.
I have a question. This is Shannon. Isn't it ultimately the property owner's responsibility to fertilize and water and do all those things that keep the tree healthy?
Yes, if someone's living there. In some cases, there's not a house there yet, so it's up to the developer. The developer, usually they hire someone, a company that comes around and waters them and such, but it depends. If there's a house there, yes, they would prefer that the homeowner do that what you're saying, yes.
What you mean they prefer, but ultimately the responsibility is on the homeowner, right?
Well, if they live there, yeah. Not in all cases is there a house there yet. Right.
They'll plant the tree, but a house hasn't been built. So then the developer is responsible to maintain that tree for the first 2 years.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
I would like to add, this is Mike. First of all, David, thanks for pointing that out. That was a big issue, as you well know, on Red Oak. I saw multiple trees getting replaced multiple times before they actually found some stuff that took, and that was all on the developer's dime. So I think that's a valid point. The thing I was thinking about in terms of future liability, you know, and I think both points are valid. It is a future liability, but it will be farther out. If we were to go down the path of changing this, perhaps one caveat that we might want to put in, or at least consider, is that we would replace the tree subject to funds availability in the Environmental Enhancement Fund. That way, we're not taking on a liability that we're not funded for. So it might help alleviate that part of it.
You know, I agree with that. And another idea is possibly to encourage property owners to care for their trees. We might want to consider replacing not at 100%, but if I can finish my sentence, maybe replacing the tree at like 50% or 75% of the cost of the tree. And that would encourage the property owner to properly care for the tree so that at least they're assuming some responsibility for taking care of those assets.
Well, I think we either have to replace them at 100% or not replace them. I think it's going to be a hard sell to go to people and say, oh, by the way, this tree died. We have no idea why. And then they say, well, I took care of it. I don't know why it died. Why should I have to replace it? It's on the city's property. It's in your right of way. It's a city tree. You guys should maintain it. I think the better approach would be to encourage residents to take care of the trees in front of their home. You could have a program through the Parks Commission, adopt a tree kind of thing. But I agree we should encourage them to take care of the tree, but I don't know that we can make it mandatory since it is a city entity, a city-owned tree.
Well, and the rights of way, that property belongs to the property owner. It's a right of way of the city. So I guess I need clarification on this right of way. Is that actually city property, or does that property belong to the property owner?
David, do you know how that works with right of ways, or maybe Alice and Fauski, one of the two of you, would you know?
Madam Mayor, if I could. My understanding is that right-of-way is essentially an easement of sorts, in that, so it's, when a property is platted, it essentially takes a picture of sorts of what would be a roadway and utility easement, drainage easement. So there isn't fee title to right-of-way, and if a right-of-way is vacated, it's the right-of-way then defers back to the adjacent property owner where the right-of-way was granted. Now, as far as looking at the legality of maintenance of a tree or something within the right-of-way, I would certainly defer to the city attorney's office as far as what his opinion would be on that. But that's my understanding of underlying rights.
Yeah, I think right-of-way is slightly different than an easement. So utility easement is specifically for the purpose of utilities. But I think a road right-of-way is slightly different, and maybe we'd have to have Ron weigh in on that one. But I guess the bottom line is whether it belongs to the property owner or whether it belongs to the city, it still is a tree that the city planted. It's the city accepted the improvement, and also, so why wouldn't we maintain the trees that are in the right of way? I guess that would be the question. And I think that's the question that we're asking. Do we want to replace trees that have died? Do we maintain them? or do we just remove them? And if they are on a right of way and it's people's property, as you said, Shannon, then should they remove it? Should we require them to remove the tree? I don't think so. That's not where I think we want to go with this. But that's just my opinion.
My opinion is if the tree dies because of a disease that is like ash borer or Dutch elm disease, or we don't have elm trees here, but some kind of disease, I think that's something the property owner isn't responsible for. That's something that I think the city can step in and replace diseased trees. What I'm just getting at is if trees are neglected and they're not watered or they're not fertilized or they're just not tended to, I don't think the city should have a liability there. So that's all I'm saying.
Okay. All right. So where do we want to go with this? We want to replace boulevard trees. We don't want to replace boulevard trees. I think that's the bottom line, basically, is what staff would like to get direction on. I think one idea was we're going to replace them as long as we have the money in the environmental fund. If that money ever runs out, then we stop replacing them. That was one thought. Are we on board with that? Just kind of chime in.
John T., I would agree with that. If we're going to change it to replace one, I don't think we leave it up to the homeowner, or the city has to make a judgment call on whether it was diseased or whether it was abused. Although I would guess that most cases it would be disease that takes them out. Most trees, once they're established, I don't water the trees in our yard once they're 3-4 years old. They're just nature. They just adapt to nature and they grow. I think replacing from our fund, as long as the verbiage is, as Mr. Molitor says, somehow equates to having the funds to do it, we'll do it. And I think then it will continue to keep the boulevards look nice. Other than, of course, you may have adult trees, and then in the middle of them, you're going to have maybe a younger one because it's just been one taken out and one put back in. But at least you'll have a consistent flow of trees down the city street, which I admit makes things look nice. So I would lean to saying we'll replace, but the verbiage to say as long as the funds are there to do it.
Okay. All right.
So at what point do we decide there isn't enough funding?
When the fund is gone.
When it's gone?
Straightforward.
So there's no reserve. I mean, we've talked about just keeping that money now for, possible future, diseases that are anticipated as happening. So do we keep a reserve? I mean, you can't go below this amount or anything like that?
Well, then how would you ever use the reserve?
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, it's a pretty theoretical question because I don't think but second of all, given if it was a current state issue, I don't know how you'd ever end up using the reserve then.
Well, if you have a disease that comes through, then you would have, money in there to support the replacement of diseased trees.
But that's what we're talking about. I think, as John pointed out, that if once the tree has been established after the 2 years, generally or typically, it's not because you don't water them. It's a disease that will take it, and it would be hard to prove that it wasn't taken care of. That's the other issue with that. But and I think if we just replace trees as they die, let's just say they're all diseased, and we replace them. And when the money runs out, that's it. Then we don't do it anymore.
This is John. The only caveat I got to that, and you all can expound on this, is obviously we use the tree funds for our parks as well. We've got a number of parks, and if I had to push come to shove, I'd rather we have the money to put replacement trees in our public parks than necessarily have to replace them down a city street as well. I guess that's just something
Yeah.
to be considered.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor and Council, if I may, quick, David here. Just to be clear, I don't think that we technically would need to change anything with our ordinance. If you look at the ordinance, the way it's written, 510, it talks about other city-sponsored initiated activities regarding tree planting or environmental enhancement. There's a couple things in there I think we could use to say that it's okay for us to go ahead and replant boulevard trees should they die. This is more of a policy direction, really, is what I anticipated coming out of this. Correct. I guess I'm looking for some clarification if the council wants to go ahead and actually change the ordinance or not. I think we're fine the way it is now. If you direct us to go ahead and do this, we can do that. But I just wanted to point that out.
Sure. I don't know that you need to change anything then. If you can do it without any changes, that's what I would do.
Correct. I certainly think we can.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, since I made that not a motion, but that suggestion that we do that, I was thinking along a policy perspective as well. That way, if we do get into a situation where we come, as John pointed out, where we have to make a decision between parks and boulevards, we can make that decision without having to change the ordinance.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I think you've got some direction there, David. Are you clear?
Yes, I'm fine.
I had one more comment to make.
Sure. Go ahead.
This is Shannon. I just had one more comment to make. I don't have any problem with replacing diseased trees that are there now. I do have a problem with replacing neglected trees, but I think we really ought to consider the reasons why St. Bonnie and Plymouth and Medina are all discouraging planting in the right of way. I think there's a good reason why they're doing that, and I think it's going to create a liability in the future for us. And maybe tonight's not the night to determine that policy, but I think we ought to consider the wisdom of encouraging developers to plant in the right of way. I think that's just going to create a liability down the road. So I'm fine with replacing diseased trees now.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we'll move on to storm and tree debris policy. Again, I think is that Mr. Abel or Gary, Mike? Who's going to take that one?
Madam Mayor, it'll be myself and Gary Peters to discuss this item on the work session agenda. If the council recalls, we had a small tornado, but it did a good amount of damage in a small area of town last year. And City Council got reports on that as the cleanup happened for a number of homeowners in that area. And one of the things that I brought to the council's attention was that we really did not have a policy in place. And so both Mr. Peters and I did some research, and those materials are in your packet. And we also came with a recommendation. Generally, larger cities are the ones that you'll see kind of take a hard line approach where they will not touch trees that have fallen on people's property. If they fall in a city park or if they fall on a city street, they'll clean it up, but it's ultimately under each homeowner's discretion to clean up those downed trees from a storm. Then there's some smaller cities that are neighbors, especially kind of in the lakes area, that don't have a policy. In fact, a couple of them said, hey, now that you're asking, maybe we might think of one too. So I kind of consider Minnetrista in our 8,000, 10,000 resident range once we include St. Bonnie. It's hard to tell where the border ends and stops when you're there. But in general, we're getting to the point now where I think it'd behoove us to have a storm cleanup and a tree debris policy. And the reason I mentioned St. Bonnie is because our emergency management director, Paul Falls, serves for both cities since we're under the St. Bonnie's under our contract, and he would have a say in that. So our recommendation is to kind of do what we've been doing, except formalizing it. So the idea is to have whoever sits in these chairs in the future, right now it's myself, Chief Falls, and Gary, to put our heads together and on a case-by-case basis to kind of decide what, if any, assistance that we would provide residents. It's kind of what we did last year and probably in years past. But there would be, it gives us that discretion because I think we want some sort of flexibility in this depending on the size of the storm and the number of trees that are down citywide, what happened to City Hall. As an example, if we have a tornado and City Hall's demolished, obviously it's going to make operating under those kind of circumstances a little harder than if we weren't. But the idea is for us to be able to decide and then kind of say, here's what it is, that here's the areas and here's how long, or here's what we'll do and here's what we don't do. And I think that would formalize kind of what we've already been doing. One issue that we will need to research, and it came up in discussions not only last week, but last council meeting Monday, but this meeting as well, is what to do in the case of a tree that is, on somebody's private property and they really don't have the equipment or manpower to be able to get those downed trees out of their way. Let's say they're crossing their driveway and it's 20 feet up their driveway or something like that. Obviously, we would still have some discretion, but what we want to be aware of and what we will research when we do bring something back to the council for consideration is the liability implications of doing that. I don't know if we, have Gary and his guys have a whole bunch of waiver forms that people would sign when we come on their property, or what, but we'll have to do some work on that. But barring that detail, the idea is for us to be able to have some discretion at the staff level to assess the storm and on a case-by-case basis. And with that, I'll let either Chief Falls or Gary kind of add some comments to this discussion.
Well, I'll just start. Then I say I agree with Mike, on stuff with size. The only thing that we look at is it was a small tornado that we had, and if it was God forbid we ever get hit with a big one, there's absolutely no way that we could do what we did for everybody. So that's why we're kind of talking about this, as this. I mean, it's a nice thing we did for people, but on a grand scale, there'd just be no way. I mean, it would take us months to do that if it was on a grand scale. So I guess that's just my 2 cents into putting in for a context where, we'll have to make it as a case-by-case decision.
And Chief, do you have anything to add?
Yes, Mayor and Council, I would agree with Mr. Baroni and Gary Peters. I think, what we've seen over the years is no two storm systems are the same, and having that discretion is vital because the recovery process can vary so greatly depending on the extent of the damage. And so while I think it's important to have a policy in place that kind of outlines what our options are, I think there needs to be a lot of discretion just because, the amount of work and staff and all those things that may or may not be available really vary depending on the scenario. So I guess that's my 2 cents worth. So I know that Mr. Baroni and Mr. Peters and I have had some brief conversations about this, and we're all in agreement on that.
Okay. Well, I'll start with just a couple comments. If we did anything where we actually went onto private property to help them remove trees, one, absolutely the liability issue would have to be addressed first. So I think Ron would have to weigh in on that. And then the other thing, I'm a little reluctant to say, we'll go and help them remove all their trees or whatever. But for sure, I think we should look at the safety issue of it. So for instance, if they have large trees blocking their driveway, where should it be needed, an ambulance or a fire truck would not have access to their home, that would be one thing I think for sure we should make sure that their driveways are cleared. Beyond that, I think it would have to be a discretionary thing, but that's just a few off the top of my head comments. Shannon, do you have any comments?
Yes, thank you. I agree. I think the city's responsibility is for trees on public property unless those trees pose a public safety hazard. And it, like Mayor Whalen said, access and fire suppression, and if there isn't access to the home, I think that's the only consideration I would make in sending city personnel to clear someone's property, because homeowners have insurance to do that, and it's not a liability that the city should take. I think homeowners are responsible for having insurance to take care of those things. It's not a burden that the city should bear, unless there's a public safety issue.
Okay. All right. John?
I would concur with Ms. Bruce, and would be careful on where we do volunteer the city services to go into someone's yard to help them. Always want to be sure, obviously, after a storm, there is insurance issues, and sometimes insurance adjusters want to see what the situation is. But obviously, if the trees are across the road and they're hindering traffic, that for sure, we want to somehow document that we'll be out there and that we'll clean it up. The question I guess I would have on that is, we cut it up, do we just pile it on the side of the road for the homeowner to take care of, or does our public works haul that away and then we incur the cost of disposing of that?
Okay. Gary or Mike Brony, you want to have any thoughts on that?
Oh, go ahead, Paul.
If I can comment real quickly to that end, one of the things that I think it's important to have the discretion piece is oftentimes when we get big storms, this last tornado did not qualify because it was very limited, but we've had storms in the past that did, where FEMA would reimburse for some of those things. So I think that would definitely be part of a decision as to whether or not the city is going to physically pick up stuff from the right of way and haul it away, or leave that to the homeowner. So just a thought to keep in mind. That's why it's so important we be able to make that decision on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. All right.
And I would say anything in the roads or something, we would, yes, definitely pick up, haul away, but if it is a tree blocking a driveway, and I think we've had this actually come up in one of the storms, I think Chief Falls, I think we had a person that had a tree blocking in the driveway, and we just cut the tree and left it there because they had a health issue at that house. I believe it was even on Minneapolis Avenue. I wouldn't have a problem with that, as long as we just, make it clear that we'll open up your driveway, we leave the tree there, it's your responsibility to remove the rest of it, but we'll get you open at least that way. We've done that in the past. I know it was on Minneapolis Avenue a bunch of years ago, and we had a windstorm that came through, and we did open up some driveways just so people could get in, so.
Right. I think it's important I think this conversation is going down a path of private property, and at least from my perspective, that's not the intention of this policy. From my perspective, the only time I would consider even asking anyone to do that would be in a public safety issue. We have an access issue, or right. Someone hurt we can't get to, or something like that. Other than that, I'm talking about right of way or public areas, from my perspective.
Yeah, or private driveways for access to their homes. Yeah. Okay.
Right, just for access.
Yeah. Mike Molitor?
I'd kind of echo what everyone's saying. The only caveat I'd probably add that hasn't been discussed is, to the extent you're using discretion, just kind of keep in mind the perspective of fairness, meaning that, and I don't think it's be a problem, but just something to consider is that if we're doing something, and every situation is different, we can probably go with that as a rationale, but we don't really want to. We want to be pretty conservative on this so that we don't set the precedent that, hey, there's a storm 2 years ago and they came and cleaned out my whatever. Now I've got a storm, and that just want to make sure that we're properly managing that. And I think that'll be the case. I just want to make sure that that's in the thought process and your discretion. But otherwise, I mean, I'm fine with that as you proposed here.
And Pam?
Having been very close to the situation last time, I believe that the staff recommendations is very well stated. I know that the way you guys, the staff, handled it last time was very well done. People were very happy with the extent of help that was offered, and it was timely. And I heard a lot of really, really good things just throughout the neighborhood. There was a couple of things and public safety, yes, is a huge issue. Having driveways cleared for public issue reasons is very important. And what else? Oh, there was a couple of things that was done, and just minor possibilities that should be extended in the future. Access to some place to have people bring dead trees or fallen trees to burn, because not all properties have a place to burn, would be very nice. I believe you guys did this last time. And also, the burning permits were waived, the fees for people that suffered from tornadoes, down trees. That was just a nice gesture for people, because they needed to get rid of the trees, and just to offer that, it's not that big of an expense to the city. So I think the recommendation listed is excellent, and I agree with it.
All right. So do you have enough direction, Mike Brony?
Mayor and council, I do. I just have one additional comment, and it's going to require some additional research on our part as we put this policy together. But I did include a policy overview from the city of Maplewood, Missouri. Now I know that's Missouri and not Minnesota, which is why I'm stating this. But they had a section in their policy that had to do with homeowners insurance covering the storm damage for your home. And in this, it said it's not generally covered under your homeowner's policy. I'm not aware if it is or isn't in Minnesota, but they said in this Missouri example, you could buy additional endorsement in order to have that be part of your homeowner's coverage. So I think we'll try to do a little work, and then maybe that's something once we publish this or put it on our website, and just encourage people, if you have a lot of trees and you might want to check your homeowner's policy, and if you feel like you don't have coverage for cleaning up, like if you lose 20 trees or something, you may want to look into an endorsement. Where I live, it's a nice lot, but I don't have all that many trees, so I probably wouldn't buy it. If it lands anywhere on my house or my car, then it'll be covered that way. But if it just lands in my yard, I might just be out the money to clean it up one-shot deal versus having an endorsement that I would pay for every year. So we'll look into that. But other than that, I think we have enough direction here from feedback from council to try to put together a policy to bring back in the future.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Mike. So anybody else?
Hello, this is Shannon.
Yes.
This is Shannon. I just wanted to chime in on the hauling, disposing of trees. I think that's an insurance coverage that insurance should cover. And I agree. I think homeowners need to just understand that they can insure for that or not. But I don't think it's a burden that should fall on the city to haul and dispose of trees. I think that's a responsibility a homeowner should be responsible for.
So to that end, I can personally attest, homeowners insurance doesn't cover everything. It's very limited when it comes to dead trees falling on your property. But as I think Mike pointed out, we could encourage homeowners to check with their insurance companies and to see what their policy does cover, especially during this storm time right now. But the other thing is, I agree. I don't think we should be removing it for them, but offering maybe an area where they can bring it to have it be disposed of is good. Otherwise, some people end up with a bunch of junk on their property. So I think I would agree with
have a problem with
offering.
that.
Right. So, all right. So we do want to. So I think you've got direction, Mike. So
I do.
you'll bring something back. All right.
Yes.
And okay. With that, then quickly we'll go to the next one. That's the work session potential calendar. Mike, you want to take that real quick?
Yeah, that should have said work session calendar, and all I did was update the calendar for you because the topics had moved around a little based on last council meeting's work session, where we got to just one of the three items. The other two we did tonight. So we are planning on doing the recycling discussion on May 4th. That is staying put, and then we move swamp back to May 18th, and then the final two did not move at all. So it's just wanted the council to have the latest and greatest on the calendar. It did change some, but that's all I wanted to do. I haven't got to the point now of working on the last half of the year calendar yet. So, but I will be.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions then? Okay. Hearing none then, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion. This is Pam.
Okay. Pam made the motion. Is there a second?
John T. L. second.
Okay. And John seconded that. So Pam, how do you vote?
For the work session?
Or adjourning. Just adjourning.
I'm like, what are we on here? Yes, I vote to adjourn. Right. Yes.
Okay. And Mike?
Yes.
And John?
Yes.
And Shannon?
Yes.
Okay. And
before
Lisa?
I say yes, can I just clarify that the
there
telephone number
discussion.
And ID for the
okay, hold on just a second, Shannon.
The council meeting?
Shannon, hold on just a minute.
Yes.
We can adjourn, and then you can ask Allison about that. I have a motion on the table, and we're doing a roll call. So let's finish that. And then, Allison, if you could then kind of inform us all about the call-in. So with that, everybody did say yes to adjourning. We are adjourned. Allison, you want to fill us in on the call-in for the council meeting?
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So my apologies. I'm not sure why there was some difficulty with some folks accessing the meeting this evening. If you're calling in, the number that I have on the meeting for the meeting is 312-626-6799. There are other numbers available too, but that's the first one listed. And the meeting ID that you'll need is 951-4124-5868.
I'm sorry. Okay, can you repeat that again, Allison?
Sure. The webinar ID is 951-4124-5868.
68. Okay. 951-4124-5868. That's the web ID.
Correct.
Okay. So that would get us in as a participant or as an attendee.
That would get you in as a participant. So what I have here for password so that you could enter in as a panelist is 309223.
So if all of us enter that same password, that would get all of us in?
I think that gets you in as a panelist. I'm not sure why. I'm wondering if some of it has to do with if people are coming in from a phone versus an email. I'm not sure. I don't know enough about the software. But if you do come in as a guest, I do have a list of the last 3 digits of phone numbers for the council and for staff. And so I do watch that. So if for some reason you enter in as a guest, please just hang on and I will go ahead and change you to a panelist. And then I'm trying my best to keep on top of it and acknowledging people when they come in to let them know I see them, and I'll be moving them over.
Okay. All right. Any questions?
So we are not going to have to use our participant ID number, because I did have to use that on this call.
Well, I'm not.
Have it handy.
Yeah.
Have it handy.
I would bring it in. The challenge is I think I see things differently than you folks do, because I have the account, and so I don't necessarily see it the same way you folks do as panelists or guests to the webinar.
Well, tell you what, we'll just try it, and eventually I think we'll all get on, and I think we'll take a few-minute break here, and then we'll come back and hopefully all be on by 7 o'clock. And if not, we'll wait for you.